Okay, so we're picking up our story in the late 1960s. Last time we saw Dhirubhai Ambani really get Reliance off the ground as a textile manufacturer, right? He built Vimal into this totally recognizable, established brand. But here is where the story shifts gears. We're about to watch a profound transformation. We're going to see how a successful textile entrepreneur essentially became a master operator within India's incredibly complex political and bureaucratic system.
Later on, Dhirubhai actually shared a really cryptic reflection with some of his close associates. He said, "Everything that I have done has been kept in the ground, and a first-class fountain has been built over it. Nobody will ever know what I have done." It's such a striking quote because it perfectly captures his entire operating philosophy during this era. You see, the gleaming success of his Vimal brand, that was the beautiful fountain. But it was built on this incredibly complex, entirely hidden mechanism of political and financial maneuvering, all kept deep underground. Today, we're going to examine the plumbing of that fountain.
If you look at the geographical divide of his growing empire, it's pretty fascinating. By the late 1960s, Reliance had a massive physical textile factory operating out in Naroda, which was managed mostly by his brother. But Dhirubhai, he stayed put in Bombay. You have to remember, unlike the established legacy business houses like the Birlas or the Tatas, Dhirubhai didn't just inherit generational political influence. He knew the actual power didn't sit on the factory floor. It lived in the cities. That's where you could control the yarn supply, trade import licenses, and most importantly, navigate the government bureaucracies. Honestly, for about a decade, physical manufacturing was almost a side gig to his trading and political activities.
To really understand why he focused so heavily on the city, we have to talk about the license Raj. This was an elaborate, heavily restrictive system of government licenses, quotas, and regulations. Basically, to set up, run, or even slightly expand any business in India at the time, you needed explicit government approval, every single step of the way. So to survive and thrive in this highly regulated environment, business owners literally had to court the politicians and bureaucrats. They held absolute, unquestioned power over industrial expansion. A single signature on a government file was worth an absolute fortune. And Dhirubhai was driven by this philosophy of maintaining relationships at literally every single level. He built an absolute machine for influence. He'd take these early morning flights to New Delhi with a fellow yarn trader turned politician, Murli Deora. They'd actually park their bags with a friendly clerk at the Ashoka Hotel just to save money while they spent the day lobbying. He brought in his nephew, Rasik Mazwani, to be a key dealmaker. He hired V. Balasubramanian as a full-time lobbyist. And eventually, he cultivated ties to Yashpal Kapoor and R.K. Donan. Now, these weren't just anybody. They were the gatekeepers to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi herself.
But then, the rules of this lobbying game changed completely in 1969. The government passed an amendment banning direct corporate political contributions. The idea, on paper, was to clean up politics, but in reality, it inadvertently fueled a massive system of black money. Companies were effectively forced to rely on untaxed funds, money generated through things like underinvoicing or fictitious sales, just to maintain the political patronage they desperately needed to secure those vital licenses.
Now, Dhirubhai's strategic alliances were incredibly far-sighted. Take T.A. Pai, for instance. He led Syndicate Bank, which was one of the early financiers of Reliance's textile manufacturing. When banks were later nationalized in India, Pai maintained his support, and that loyalty paid off because Pai later entered politics, eventually becoming the Minister of Commerce and then the Minister of Industries. By 1975, Pai actually overruled departmental objections just to grant Reliance the clearances they needed to quadruple their polyester texturizing capacity. Quadruple. And alongside Pai, Dhirubhai also cultivated ties with Harkishan Das Parekh at ICICI to get vital institutional backing. For Dhirubhai, relationships weren't just networking, they were his true capital.
So let's talk about the actual commodity driving all this wealth, polyester. India's economic planners at the time prioritized heavy industry over consumer goods. As a result, a severe shortage of artificial fibers emerged, and this created a massive market distortion. The domestic price for polyester filament yarn was driven up to 7 times higher than the international market price. So if you could secure international yarn and somehow bring it into India, you were guaranteed absolutely immense profit margins.
Dhirubhai's approach to all these regulations was brilliantly simple. Understand the rules better than anyone else, and then find ways to use them. Enter the 1971 High Unit Value Scheme. Here is exactly how he mastered it. Reliance would export finished textiles to foreign markets, sometimes even taking a financial loss on the sale itself. But as a reward for exporting, the government granted highly restricted replenishment, or REP, import licenses. Dhirubhai then used these specific licenses to import that cheap international polyester yarn we just talked about, and he sold it into the starving domestic market for up to a 600% profit.
It was a pretty wild operation. Reliance launched these highly publicized export campaigns, chartering special flights to places like Poland and Saudi Arabia to sell Vimal textiles. But while the ostensible public goal was selling fabrics overseas, the true economic driver, the real reason for all of it, was generating those rep-import licenses. The exports were simply the vehicle. The ultimate strategy was always to use the resulting import licenses to completely dominate India's domestic polyester supply.
But, as you can probably guess, as Reliance aggressively cornered this import market, competitors started whispering. Allegations began floating around the markets. People claimed that some of Reliance's exports were actually bogus, that they were artificially sustained through illegal hawala financing networks just to generate the lucrative import licenses. It leaves us with a fascinating question. Was this a brilliant, hyper-aggressive business strategy or a systematic manipulation of the system?
Now, it is absolutely crucial to note here that these claims were never definitively proven by the authorities. While rumors of artificial exports and hawala financing dogged Dhirubhai for years, they remained exactly that, unproven allegations. And the reality on the ground was really complex. Reliance's export managers, guys like Dhirubhai Luchala, were genuinely seen hustling hard in foreign markets. They were traveling everywhere from East Africa to the UK, genuinely trying to place stocks of Vimal fabrics. So it wasn't all just smoke and mirrors.
Still, Dhirubhai's response to all these rumors was uncompromising. There's this famous story of a meeting of a silk and art silk association. He's standing there, confronted by a room full of critics and competitors, accusing him of manipulating the market. And he stands up, challenges them directly, and brazenly reminds the entire room that despite all their public complaints, almost every single one of them had quietly and eagerly bought his imported yarn when they needed it to survive.
The political landscape, however, was about to shift dramatically. In 1975, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi declared emergency rule. By early 1977, she called for elections. And right here, the timing is everything. Just weeks before she and her Congress party were swept from power in March 1977, her outgoing government granted a massive and highly controversial customs duty exemption. And it was on the exact type of REP import licenses that Dhirubhai had been heavily stockpiling. This last-minute exemption acted as a sudden, massive financial gift to Reliance. By completely exempting these specific licenses from a massive 125% customs duty, Reliance netted an estimated 37.5 million rupees, pretty much overnight. To put that into perspective, it was an absolutely unprecedented windfall, secured right at the exact moment the political guard was changing. So the new Janata government comes in, and they attempt to change the rules, routing polyester imports through the State Trading Corporation. But Dhirubhai's ability to navigate chaos was just unmatched. This administrative transition created these massive chaotic delays, resulting in what became known as the infamous 11-day wonder in late 1977. During this brief, chaotic 11-day window, Reliance successfully secured massive, exclusive supplies of imported yarn from international giants like DuPont. They completely squeezed a captive market, while all their competitors were basically frozen out, waiting for the new government agencies to figure out their own logistics.
Buoyed by this near monopoly on the polyester supply, Dhirubhai aggressively expanded his domestic presence. Because he controlled the yarn, he could push his finished textiles relentlessly. He grew Vimal's exclusive franchised retail shops from around 400 in the mid-70s to over 600 by early 1980. Through heavy advertising and a super dedicated retail network, Reliance really cemented its position as India's largest textile producer.
Meanwhile, the political pendulum was swinging back. That Janata government? It was a fragile coalition, and it collapsed amid internal fractures by 1979. Dhirubhai, who was always anticipating the next shift, had maintained ties across different political groups. He actually played a quiet but highly significant role in the political maneuvering that led to this collapse. He was actively paving the way for his most powerful ally to make a return.
And return she did. In early 1980, Indira Gandhi surged back into power. To celebrate, there was a massive victory party hosted at the Ashoka Hotel in New Delhi. Now, political observers took very, very close note of the seating arrangements that day. For over 2 hours, as the Prime Minister sat on the dais receiving well-wishers, Dhirubhai Ambani was positioned prominently right by her side. The political environment was now perfectly, flawlessly aligned with his ambitions.
So with the ultimate political connections now totally secured, how would Dhirubhai leverage this power?
He had built a first-class fountain, right? Fueled by a hidden, masterful network of bureaucratic influence. He'd successfully outmaneuvered the license Raj and secured the domestic textile market. But with the political winds now blowing entirely in his favor, what massive industrial leap would he orchestrate next? How on earth do you fund a vision that outgrows even the largest textile mills? Well, we are going to explore exactly how he answers that question in our next explainer.